Hello and welcome to Frankly Speaking, where we dive deep into regional headlines and speak with leading policymakers and business leaders. I am Katie Jensen. Few people know the pressures of running Israel like Ehud Olmert. He was Prime Minister during the 2006 Lebanon war, in peace talks with the Palestinians in 2008, and through a political crisis that ended with his resignation on corruption charges. Since leaving office, he has become one of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's fiercest critics, calling for him to face trial for war crimes. On this episode, we asked the former Prime Minister what he really thinks of Israel's current government, its extremist ministers, and if Mr. Netanyahu's leadership has pushed Israel into dangerous isolation, even amongst its closest allies. Mr. Olmert, thank you for joining us today on Frankly Speaking. Now, you are on the record as saying current Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu, should be in The Hague and prosecuted for war crimes. Frankly speaking, do you think your views are widely shared among Israelis, or are they limited to members of the opposition, such as yourself?
Well, I don't think, I don't remember saying that Netanyahu should be in The Hague and convicted or indicted for criminal crime or war crimes. What I said actually is that I hope he will be indicted in the Israeli courts for committing crimes against the people of Israel. I said, and I criticized the Israeli government for committing crimes, not as a policy, by the way, not as something that has been determined and was instructed by the high authorities of the government or by the commanders of the Israeli army to kill indefinitely civilians in Gaza. Mm-hmm. But the whole war, which is started after the violation of the temporary ceasefire agreement in March of 2025, is an illegitimate war. And in the illegitimate war, which is opposed by majority of the Israelis, over 70%, in which lots of Israeli soldiers will be killed when there is a serious danger to the lives of the hostages, and there will be thousands of Palestinians killed for a war which has no objective, which can't reach any goal, which will do nothing good for any party involved. Such a war is a crime, and I have accused the Israeli government for doing it. But I didn't suggest that the Prime Minister will be indicted in Hague. I'd rather indict him in Israel for the crimes that he committed against the people of Israel. Now, how many of the Israelis share this opinion? I thought that at the beginning, when I accused the Israeli government for making these terrible decisions, I was in a tiny minority. I think that now I'm part of a majority, that more and more Israelis understand that this is a war which should not be expanded and that should end right now to allow the exchange of the hostages and the beginning of a process.
Okay, well, let me ask you in more detail then about the Israeli sentiment on the ground, because you're right, we've seen tens of thousands of Israelis take to the streets in recent days as well to protest the war and, of course, Mr. Netanyahu's latest plans to take over Gaza City. You've called his behaviour reckless. But on the flip side, we saw a Jerusalem Post poll back in June. That was after the latest Iranian conflict. That showed that Mr. Netanyahu's Likud party had actually surged in popularity after the Iranian war, gaining 2 seats, even though the opposition bloc still remains ahead. So where does the Israeli society now stand, in your opinion?
Well, I'm not sure that I can give you an accurate answer for exactly where it is. It's true, probably, that after the attack against Iran and the success of the Israeli Air Force to control the air of popularity to Netanyahu, which he didn't have the wisdom and the understanding that he can pass away rapidly, and he did. I suggested in an article in The Economist, the British Economist, that had Netanyahu been smart, he would have then, immediately after the war vis-a-vis Iran, he would have ended the war in Gaza and make the exchange of the hostages, and then pull out from Gaza in return for an introduction of a security force coming to Gaza, made of Palestinians, of moderate Arabs from Saudi Arabia, from Egypt, from Jordan, from Emirates, from everywhere there, and that will take over and make sure that Hamas will not rise again into a position of dominance, and that there will be also an administration formed in order to govern Gaza instead of Hamas. Had Netanyahu done all this, then he may have win a great deal of support in the Israeli, more permanent and consistent support of the Israeli public opinion in the world. But he is a captive of the Messianic groups in his own cabinet, and of course, he didn't make use of this brief shining moment in order to change course, and he lost most of what he may have achieved on that particular moment.
It does seem that with his popularity surging after the Iranian conflict, at least, it does appear that a large chunk of Israel's population does endorse this hardline approach. But I think another concern we've seen really is that the actions of this government have not only alienated Israel's allies, but also created deep divisions within Jewish communities worldwide. There are many who now say this right-wing coalition does not represent the Jewish faith at all, but is hijacking it in the name of violence, and much like terrorists of other religions, using faith as a shield for extremism. When we look at some of the comments from his ministers, people like Finance Minister Mr. Smotrich, who said there is no such thing as Palestinian people. He stood under a map of Greater Israel while saying that. He's also said the Palestinian village of Huwara should be wiped out. Or comments from National Security Minister Ben Gvir, who went on Israeli television and said his right to move freely in the West Bank is more important than Palestinians' freedom of movement. So, Mr. Olmert, let me ask you directly, if we consider these men's words and actions, in your view, are these men terrorists?
Look, this is an easy part of the question is, yes, they are, in a way, in the sense that Ben Gvir was convicted in a series of different indictments in the Israeli courts for taking part in what is considered to be a terrorist actions in the past. But I think that the situation is somewhat more complex. Let's face it, on one hand, there are these Messianic groups which are totally unacceptable to the majority of the Israelis. There is no question about it. They are extreme, they are Messianic. Yes, indeed, they want to expel all the Palestinians from the West Bank and annex the West Bank to be an integral part of the state of Israel. And so they want to do in Gaza. But I think that the majority of the Israelis are against it. And in the broader context of what we are talking about, let's not forget that in 2008, 2009, when I was Prime Minister, I proposed to the President of the Palestinian Authority a comprehensive peace plan based on the 67 borders, with a Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel, with the Arab side of Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine, with the old city of Jerusalem under no exclusive political sovereignty, not Israeli political sovereignty and not Palestinian political sovereignty. And that the old city, including, of course, the Temple Mount, all the important and the holy places that are sacred for Muslims, for Jews, and for Christians, that all that will be administered by a trust of 5 nations: Saudis, Jordan, Palestine, Israel, and America. And that this was proposed by me as the Prime Minister of Israel when I had a stable majority supporting my government in the Israeli parliament. And unfortunately, the Palestinian leaders did not sign in, did not approve, were not ready to come along. They never said yes. They never said no, but they never said yes. So in other words, what I want to say is this: the present ministers in the Israeli cabinet are totally unacceptable. They are messianic, they are extremists, they are fundamentalists. They are not different from the Iranian ministers that are subject to the total influence of the Ayatollahs there and the Ayatollahs here. Do they represent the majority of the Israeli people? I believe not. Are there different forces coming from Israel like mine? Yes, there are millions of Israelis that subscribe to my criticism and my vision of a political solution. Are we a majority at the present time in the public opinion? No, I don't think so. Can we become a majority in the public opinion? Yes, I believe so. It requires determination, leadership, perseverance, consistency, and a vision. And I believe that we will come along victorious, but it will take more time, and the Ben-Gvirs and the Smotriches will be wiped out to the sidelines of history.
And I think the big concern is you say that Mr. Smotrich and Mr. Ben-Gvir do not accurately represent Israeli society today. But of course, these are not marginal figures. They are sitting ministers in Mr. Netanyahu's cabinet. They have been sanctioned, even declared persona non grata by Western allies. And yet Mr. Netanyahu himself in recent days has now gone even further with some of his comments. He's been talking about a greater Israel, talking about annexing land from neighbouring Arab states, even those who have signed peace treaties. Tell me, is this something that you would ever have called for as Prime Minister?
No, I didn't. Look, again, presently there is a very clear distinction, which is very hard to grasp and to tolerate and to acquiesce with, but we have to realize it. The public opinion, more than 70%, perhaps 75%, perhaps 80%, are consistently saying that they are in favor of ending the war, full stop, and return the hostages, whatever all the other possible ramifications may be. But this is what they want. At the same time, there is a government which has a clear-cut majority in parliament based on elections which took place 3 years ago. Country is polarized. There is a deep division between a major part of the public opinion which is in favor of changing course, and the part which is now governed by the Netanyahus and the group of thugs which are known to be the cabinet ministers. Now, what they are doing, they are causing a very big damage to the reputation of the State of Israel, to the integrity of the State of Israel, into the perception of what Israel stands for. And that causes a huge difficulty in the relations of Israel with the traditional friends of Israel, European countries, France, Germany, Great Britain, Canada, other countries. And it also creates difficulties that will become more and more difficult to deal with America. And unfortunately, also it creates difficulties with our very important friends in Egypt and in Jordan, and also in the Emirates. And it certainly prevents the possible movement towards a normalization process with Saudi Arabia. which is obviously a desire of so many Israelis. So had I been Prime Minister, it would have been entirely different. I would have adopted what I represented at the time that I was Prime Minister, talking about a two-state solutions, negotiating with it, hopefully trying to force a Palestinian leadership to comply with. As you may know, I since last year, July last year, I collaborate with a very distinguished Palestinian, the former foreign minister of the Palestinian Authority, and the former UN ambassador, Dr. Nasser al-Qudwa, the nephew of Arafat, and we signed a joint statement on the 17th of July, 2024, in which we called for the end of the war in Gaza and for the necessary steps to be taken in order to complete the release of hostages and the release of prisoners and the introduction of a security force and the building up of a new administration to govern Gaza without the Hamas, and also the beginning of a negotiating process between Israel and Palestine on the two-state solution basis, on the basis of the peace plan that I presented to Mahmoud Abbas in 2008. This is what I would have worked for. This is what I defend. This is what I support. This is what I think is the necessary, inevitable course that should be adopted by us and by the Palestinians. By the way, both sides are having leadership. It's not just us, it's also the Palestinians. And the Palestinian Authority needs to be reformed dramatically in order to become a more effective executive political government that will be capable of handling all the challenges facing the Palestinians as a result of these tragic 2 years that they had been through.
Well, given what's going on the ground at the moment, it does feel like we're very far away from that. Now, there's certainly a growing concern internationally. You've mentioned there on a domestic front too, that Israel's war policy is being driven not by national security, but by one man's drive for personal survival, that essentially Mr. Netanyahu wants to prolong the war in order to avoid being held accountable by the Israeli people for the October 7 attacks and the multiple security breaches that took place, and to avoid answering on the corruption charges. Tell me, Mr. Olmert, is that something that you agree on? And is that sentiment being echoed across Israel?
Look, when these words, this criticism comes from my side, from the Israeli side, it's perfectly legitimate. When it comes from your side, it's somewhat problematic, and I'll tell you why. Because it's very easy and simple for you to want to say that the war is dominated largely by personal interest of survivability of the Israeli Prime Minister, which is true. But you tend not to recognize how it all started in October of 23. It started with a terrible, most atrocious, barbaric, horrific massacre of thousands of Israeli civilians by Hamas, by the Palestinians, breaking through the border into the private residences, not of soldiers in the military camps, but of private residences in their homes, in the living rooms, in the bedrooms, killing and raping and beheading children, their mothers, the elderly members of the families, in a surge of some crazy, barbaric, unbelievable cruelty that can't be forgotten and can't be forgiven. Now, all this has to be put into the context when we talk about the war.
But do you
what
feel...
we can say, allow me, please. What we can say, and I entirely agree, I say it myself, is that one thing was the 8th of October, and another thing is 22 months afterwards. What can be said now couldn't be said then. What happened then was inevitably the reason for all these mess and chaotic events which took place in the last 2 years.
Okay, but
However,
Mr. Olmert, you are saying you're saying Mr. Netanyahu is not interested.
We have to measure things in an entirely different way. And I think that at this time, now, when there is not any objective that is worth the cost, when Hamas has been completely eradicated as a military power.
But do you feel that Mr. Netanyahu is not interested in survival or escaping corruption?
Innocent Palestinians is a crime, and I'm against it.
Okay, but if I can ask you, you're saying Mr. Netanyahu is not interested in survival or escaping corruption at the moment.
As I said, this is not what I say. This is what everyone says in Israel now, that this is an unneeded and unnecessary war, that there is not any national interest of Israel which can be served by continuing the war. And therefore, the inevitable conclusion is that it serves the personal interests of the Prime Minister. This is something which has been said by everyone, particularly after the Chief of Staff of the Israeli army say
well,
that
let me ask you, Mr.
expanding the
Olmert.
war now against Gaza, which is so densely populated with more than 1 million people, and where the Hamas is hiding inside the most densely populated areas with non-involved citizens,
let me ask you, when we come back to the corruption charges.
And a death trap for Israelis for something which doesn't serve any national interest is a crime, and you have to ask yourself, what does it serve? And therefore, many people conclude that it serves the personal interest.
But let me ask you, because if I can go back to my previous question, Mr. Olmert, I'd be interested in your thoughts. When we talk about Mr. Netanyahu's corruption charges, if you don't mind me saying, you personally were accused and charged with corruption. In fact, you were the first Israeli former Prime Minister to serve time in prison of 16 months. So there are defenders of Mr. Netanyahu that point to these facts and say that you have no legitimacy to criticize the current government's handling of the war. How do you respond to those kind of comments?
Number one, I never talked about the indictments of Netanyahu as far as the legal proceedings are concerned, because I think that it should be determined by the court, and I have no part of it. And my answer to the others is very simple. Those who don't want to hear me don't have to listen to me. Those who ask me to speak and interview me, like you do, perhaps they have some interest in what I have to say, and therefore they ask me to answer the questions. But no one needs to listen if he doesn't want to.
So you certainly feel Mr. Netanyahu's policies are to ensure his own personal survival rather than Israel's actual national security. Let me ask you about international comments as well. During a recent interview with CNN's Christiana Manpour, former Saudi intelligence chief and veteran diplomat Prince Turki Al Faisal, he described Mr. Netanyahu as a genocidal maniac. Would you agree with that description?
No.
You would not agree?
As I said before, I think that certain things which are done are totally intolerable, unacceptable, and unforgivable. And there should be no war at this point, and that if there is one, which can't be largely explained by any genuine, serious security interest of Israel, then it's a crime. But there is a long distance between this and genocide. And I don't think that one needs to stretch these arguments far beyond the limits in order to disagree and to criticize the Israeli government. There is a lot of room to criticize the Israeli government for what is being done, rather than to stretch it into areas where there is not any serious factual basis that can justify.
Well, Mr. Olmert, if you do not call killing 60,000 Palestinians, many of them women and children, flattening entire neighborhoods, if you do that, not determine that as genocide, then what is it exactly? Because Multiple international bodies, UN related as well, have repeatedly called it a genocide. They've repeatedly referred to Mr. Netanyahu about his war crimes, as well as about starvation being used as a war tactic as well. If you would not call that genocide, what would you label it?
I think I admire the exceptional effort you make in order to turn me into a defender of Netanyahu.
No, I'm
So
generally interested in your
restrain
opinion.
this desire so that I could criticize Netanyahu without necessarily using some of the wrong judgments that you make.
Okay, so then correct me,
exactly
because we've seen the United Nations, Amnesty International.
I don't know how many of them were killed, whether 60,000, perhaps even more. There is no question that a very large part of them were Hamas fighters, and they deserve the punishment. That there were many that shouldn't have been killed, and their killing was an inevitable outcome of the fact that the only way to fight Hamas was in the densely populated areas where they were hiding, underground, on ground, in the tunnels, in the hospitals, in the mosques, everywhere. And this is a terrible outcome. And there may have been excesses which are totally unacceptable and unforgivable. I don't think that it falls within the legal definition of genocide. And the fact is that the International Court of Justice in The Hague didn't rule, in spite of the appeals that were made by South Africa and other countries to the International Court of Justice, that there is a war crime or that there is genocide, even a war crime which is committed and which has to be stopped. There was a warning. So let's put it where it is. I think, and I said it, not you. You didn't have to force me to say it, because I initiated saying it in an article in the Israeli press to the Israeli people and to the international community that war crimes were committed.
Okay, well then.
And I criticized the Israeli government for doing it. And I can't tolerate it, and I can't forgive it, because I care for the lives of Palestinians just as much as I care for the lives of any human being, when there is no reason and no basis for killing it.
Well then,
there is a
Mr.
long way
Olmert,
from
this
here
is your opportunity to correct that.
That the policy of the Israeli government is genocide. It is not. It is even the government of Netanyahu, which is a bad government, which should be removed right away, which I am against, which I criticize, which I campaign against everywhere I can, in every place I can.
Well, tell me then, because as I said, this is your opportunity to correct it.
To cause genocide.
Because one thing I would like to ask you, and as I said, this is your opportunity to correct it, and certainly you have been commented on as the Israeli Prime Minister who managed to get us closer to the peace process than any other in history. So I certainly cannot discredit that. But I want to pick up on something about you said with Hamas and civilians as well, because one question often repeatedly, quite rightly by Piers Morgan, is that Israeli officials seem to know exactly how many terrorists they killed, but cannot do the same for children and civilians. Now, Mr. Olmert, I know you have dealt directly with the IDF and the intelligence services. Tell me, how is that possible that they cannot differentiate between these numbers?
I don't think that you have and I have enough knowledge of how to be able to distinguish in the course of battle, in the battlefield, while they are shooting from all sides and people are killed, to be able to distinguish between those which are involved and those which are not involved, and those which can be called terrorists or fighters or killers or murderers, and those which are just bystanders or victims of coincidental circumstances, and so on. I don't know. I can only say one thing. My judgment is that At some point, the war lost its legitimacy. For a very long time, when it started on the 8th of October, there was not one leader in the world, starting with Joe Biden, President of America, Prime Minister Sunak of Great Britain, President Macron, whom I have enormous respect for, Chancellor Scholz at that time, Prime Minister Meloni, and I
But
can
Mr.
name you
Olmert,
all of them.
international law is clear.
Israel
The
has a
Geneva
right
Convention is
to
crystal
reach
clear.
out.
Even if
Allow
the
me, please.
enemy
Allow me,
hides among
please. Allow me
civilians.
to finish my sentence.
Sure, but
They all said Israel has a right to reach out for the Hamas leaders, knowing, and the Hamas fighters, knowing that they are hiding in the midst
but the response
of
must be
a
proportionate.
population,
And even
and
if
that
the
there
enemy
will be
hides
a
among
collateral
civilians, the
damage.
attacking army.
There will be a collateral damage, and there will be many victims that are not involved, but this is an inevitable outcome of the situation that was created by Hamas.
Yes, but the
Up to
Geneva
a certain point,
Convention,
there was a legitimacy for this.
but
And
the
therefore,
response
I
must
don't
be
know to
proportionate.
distinguish, or I don't know how to offer the army to distinguish between those which are involved and those which are not. I can say that in as long as there was a legitimacy for the war, it was one thing. From March of this year,
As I was saying earlier, the international law is clear. Even if the enemy hides among civilians, the attacking army must minimize civilian harm. The response must be proportionate. But let me slightly change direction, Mr. Olmert. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on another controversial area. What do you make of the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation? There's been widespread reports about the number of Palestinians who are looking for aid who were killed near these sites. But there's also direct testimonies from a number of snipers who have directly acknowledged that they were ordered to kill hungry civilians as they reached out for food. What's your understanding of this?
look, I think that there is a lot of fake information about precisely the circumstances regarding the humanitarian supplies and how the Hamas is trying to provoke in order to reach out for food for their own needs, knowing that Hamas is not particularly careful about the lives of Palestinians, and they didn't show that they care so much for the Palestinians living in Gaza, and how much is it a result of very unacceptable practices of Israeli soldiers. I don't know. I say one thing, and this is at the bottom line, which I think what counts. Israel controls Gaza. We are in charge there. Therefore, it is incumbent upon Israel to provide the humanitarian needs in Gaza to everyone that needs it, effectively, comprehensively, and without the interference or on the provocations of whoever wants to disturb it. This is our responsibility. If it is done effectively, then it's all right. If it is not, it is our responsibility. So I don't know whether there were any orders. I really don't know, and I doubt that there were any orders that Israeli soldiers were asked to, snipers that were asked to shoot indiscriminately or to try and kill civilians that were trying to reach out for food in the humanitarian sites. It's hard for me to accept it, and I don't know that there is any evidence that can prove it.
Well, perhaps Israel
if people were killed, if humanitarian needs were not supplied properly, if it was not done in an effective manner that would satisfy the needs of all the people, it was the responsibility of the Israeli government, because we are in control there, and it should have been done by us. And we can do things, and the army that can reach out 1,200 kilometers into Iran and fight Iranians there effectively can't make any excuses for not providing the humanitarian needs 20 kilometers from the Israeli border.
And fake news stories aside, perhaps Israel should not have prevented the UN from doing its job and allowing the unfettered distribution of aid. But we are in agreement in that area that certainly Israel, as the occupying nation, as the one carrying out the strikes, they have a responsibility to ensure that Palestinians have access to water, shelter and aid. Mr. Olmert, thank you very much for joining us today on Frankly Speaking. Really appreciate your insights as one of the rare people who knows what it takes to run Israel from the inside. We do appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.